Welcome to the debate. You are listening to us right now, and a moment ago you made the subjective choice to engage with this discourse.
Right, or at least it felt like a choice.
Exactly. But if the universe is fundamentally a meticulously engineered, deterministic clockwork of interacting particles governed strictly by classical field equations, did you actually make a choice?
Well, from a strict classical standpoint, no. I mean, if we could map the trajectory and momentum of every particle in your brain from the dawn of time, your decision to listen today was entirely predictable.
It's Laplace's demon materialized, essentially, a continuous, unbroken chain of causality. So we are forced into an uncomfortable corner here.
Yeah, either your subjective experience of free will is a deeply convincing neurological illusion, or classical determinism is fundamentally incomplete.
Precisely. And the moment we introduce the observer, the conscious entity, into this framework, that beautiful deterministic clockwork just seizes up. Standard quantum mechanics attempts to address this with the state function reduction, but it leaves us navigating a profound ontological paradox.
Which brings us to the core of our discourse today.
It does. Today, we are undertaking a rigorous examination of this exact friction point, the conceptualization of consciousness within topological geometrodynamics, or TGD, as opposed to the traditional materialistic worldview.
Grounded, of course, in Matti Pitkanen's 2026 paper, The Recent View of TGD-Inspired Theory of Consciousness and Quantum Biology.
Yes, and I will defend the position that the TGD framework, specifically through zero-energy ontology, uniquely resolves the paradoxes of free will and quantum measurement without violating physical conservation laws.
And I will defend the traditional physicalist and materialist paradigm. I maintain that while standard quantum mechanics certainly faces undeniable philosophical challenges regarding the measurement problem, TGD's ontological expansions are, frankly, mathematically extravagant.
Extravagant? I'd argue they are necessary.
Well, they include infinite hierarchies of Planck constants, multiple arrows of time, and novel number fields. They step outside of empirical falsifiability and prioritize structural elegance over observable reality.
Let us lay out the foundation of the problem before we look at the solution, though. Traditional materialism fundamentally fails to reconcile the deterministic nature of classical physics with the non-determinism of the state function reduction.
I wouldn't say it completely fails.
In the standard model, the observer remains a philosophical outsider. TGD offers a mathematically rigorous solution. It replaces the concept of three-dimensional point particles with four-dimensional space-time surfaces.
Analogous to Bohr orbits.
Right, exactly. Imagine our universe isn't just a sequence of 3D snapshots, but is mathematically embedded in a larger 8-dimensional geometric space. Specifically, Minkowski space times the complex projective plane.
Which is a massive ontological leap.
You don't need to grasp the differential geometry of that space immediately. You just need to understand that this extended geometry provides the necessary room to integrate the observer directly into the physics.
I readily acknowledge the epistemological friction inherent in standard quantum mechanics. The spontaneous collapse of the wave function, where deterministic probabilities suddenly become a singular, non-deterministic reality upon measurement, remains deeply problematic.
It's an irreconcilable conflict.
Yes, but the traditional materialistic framework remains superior precisely because of its minimal ontology. TGD essentially replaces physical reality with what the source material explicitly terms quantum platmia.
It's not just pure idealism, though.
It is a mathematical idealism where physical existence is entirely reduced to the abstract existence of quantum states in a hypothetical world of classical worlds. To sustain this, the architecture requires layering assumption upon assumption, severely violating Occam's razor. We are constructing an untestable mathematical edifice rather than a physical theory.
I disagree that it is untestable, but to understand why, we must first delve into the core mechanics of how TGD actually rescues agency. Let's look at the quantum measurement problem and the precise definition of free will.
Go on.
In standard quantum theory, a state function reduction forces a jump that brutally breaks the deterministic, unitary time evolution governed by the Schrödinger equation. Physics says reality is deterministic, quantum measurement says it is not.
And Zio claims to fix this?
TGD solves this through zero-energy ontology, or ZEO. In ZEO, quantum states are not three-dimensional snapshots frozen in a single moment. They are superpositions of entire four-dimensional deterministic time evolutions.
Bound by causal diamonds?
Bounded by a geometric structure known as a causal diamond, yes.
Let me pause you there. To ensure we are maintaining absolute clarity, you're stating that when a quantum jump occurs, a state function reduction, it does not select a new localized 3D particle state.
No, it does not.
It selects a completely new superposition of entire timelines. You are replacing the instantaneous wave function collapse with a selection among four-dimensional Bohr orbits.
Exactly. Think of it through this analogy. Imagine a vast library of motion picture film reels. Standard quantum mechanics suggests that while a film is playing deterministically on the screen, the projectionist randomly splices in a totally different, contradictory frame.
Violating the internal continuity.
It violently violates the internal physics of the movie. ZO instead suggests the projectionist is selecting an entirely different, fully complete, deterministic film reel from the library. The classical determinism of the individual timeline. The internal logic of the film is completely preserved. The locus of non-determinism, the mechanism of free will, exists entirely in the selection between reels, outside the geometric time of the film itself.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. Does replacing a 3D snapshot with a 4D Bohr orbit actually solve the measurement problem, or does it simply obfuscate it by moving the goalposts into a higher dimensional space?
It doesn't move the goalposts. It provides the required geometry for consciousness.
You are redefining free will merely as the selection of boundary conditions for a causal diamond. Epistemologically, how does this practically differ from an Everettian many worlds interpretation?
They're fundamentally different.
Are they? In the Everettian model, the determinism of the universe is technically preserved on a macro scale because every single possible outcome branches off and is realized in a separate universe. TDG seems to just hide the non-determinism in the geometric parameters of an 8-dimensional embedding space, demanding that we accept this abstract world of classical worlds as literal reality.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. The Everettian interpretation forces an exponentially branching physical reality. It imposes an infinite, continuous ontological burden, where entirely new physical universes are being generated at every microscopic interaction.
And TGG avoids this?
Yes. TGD's zero-energy ontology does not spawn endless physical universes. It updates the quantum state within the existing space of Bohr orbits. It is an epistemological refinement. The non-determinism is not hidden. It is identified as the fundamental pulse of consciousness itself.
That sounds dangerously close to philosophy, not physics.
The failure of strict classical determinism isn't an error in our math. It is the geometric correlate of intention and cognition.
But this introduces a massive complication. If we accept this 4D framework, if the film reel is already complete from beginning to end, we are forced to completely reconstruct our understanding of time itself. We must split time into two fundamentally distinct categories.
Yes. And that distinction is mathematically crucial to the entire theory. We must separate geometric time from subjective time.
Geometric time being the measurable coordinate.
Right. Geometric time is the measurable objective distance between the tips of a causal diamond in Minkowski space. It is the time variable t in our physics equations. Subjective time, however, is the conscious experience.
Defined by small state function reductions?
Exactly. It is defined in TGD as a sequence of small state function reductions. Imagine a spotlight sitting at the bottom of the causal diamond, sweeping upward. These cognitive measurements leave the passive boundary of the causal diamond unchanged.
Effectively analogous to the quantum Zeno effect, where constant observation freezes a state.
Precisely. While the active boundary scales up, increasing the size of the causal diamond in a statistical sense, that growth is the sensation of time passing.
I come at it from a different way. The materialist baseline offers a highly functional, monistic view of time. time is a single coordinate.
A coordinate that completely fails to explain the subjective now.
The subjective experience of time passing, our feeling of moving from past to future, is simply an emergent psychological phenomenon driven by thermodynamic entropy in the brain. Systems decay, heat dissipates, and our neurological pathways record that one-way directional decay as the past.
That is a very bleak view of cognition.
It is elegant, but TGAD demands two separate causalities that correlate but remain fundamentally distinct. Why introduce such immense complexity?
Because they must be separate to account for memory. In your materialist paradigm, memory is nothing more than physical data encoded in synaptic weights. It exists only in the present moment as a physiological trace.
A localized storage mechanism in the brain tissue, yes?
But because the 4D surface is the basic entity in TGD, memory fundamentally changes. Memory recall is an actual, conscious communication with the locus of non-determinism in the geometric past. You are not just reading a present-day hard drive. You are directly engaging with the 4D geometry of the event.
And this inevitably brings us to the most radical and, frankly, problematic aspect of the entire paradigm, the macroscopic, big state function reductions.
Ah, the BSFRs.
Yes. While the sequence of small state function reductions purportedly defines the subjective lifespan of a conscious entity, the theory dictates that a big state function reduction fundamentally reverses the arrow of geometric time.
At all scales, yes.
It is posited in the source material as a universal death and reincarnation at all scales. Let's ground this abstract concept in empirical reality. Let us look at the Libet experiments, a classic, well-documented battleground for the free will debate in neuroscience.
A perfect phenomenological test case.
Exactly. In Benjamin Libet's experiments, we observe that neural activity, the readiness potential, precedes the subject's conscious decision to execute a motor action, such as raising a finger.
Hundreds of milliseconds before.
Right. The brain sparks into action hundreds of milliseconds before the subject reports feeling the urge to move. Materialism elegantly and logically explains this. Decision-making relies on deterministic, subconscious processing,
making consciousness an illusion.
The biological machinery initiates the action, and the conscious mind is alerted afterward, creating the post hoc illusion of agency. We can measure this trajectory directly, but the TGD explanation claims that a macroscopic big state function reduction occurs at the moment of conscious choice, generating a signal that proceeds backwards in geometric time.
Which then initiates the neural activity in the past.
Yes. And this represents an unnecessary and severe violation of macroscopic causality.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. Libet's finding that neural activity precedes the conscious decision actually perfectly mimics dissipation with a reversed arrow of time.
Mimics, perhaps, but it doesn't necessitate actual backward time travel.
In our standard forward time perspective, the readiness potential looks like an inexplicable, spontaneous self-organization leading up to the raising of the finger. Standard materialism looks at this and dismisses consciousness as an impotent byproduct, an epiphenomenon. We are just passengers in a meat machine.
We are biological systems obeying thermodynamics.
TGD rescues agency. The backwards time signal elegantly explains why the brain appears to anticipate the future. The causality of field equations and the causality of free will are not in conflict here. They operate in tandem through ZO.
Furthermore, this mechanism of time-reverse dissipation provides a profound solution to biological homeostasis.
How so?
Well, living systems are constantly self-organizing against the thermodynamic gradient. That is a highly problematic assertion. A backward time signal may appear elegant on a mathematical chalkboard, but empirically, it completely disrupts the minimal ontology required to execute functional science.
How does it disrupt science to have a mathematical framework for homeostasis?
Because if macroscopic time reversals are occurring routinely in biological systems, if every homeostatic correction, every heartbeat, or every motor action involves a microscopic death and reincarnation with a reversed temporal arrow, the macroscopic thermodynamic landscape would be entirely chaotic.
It's not chaotic, it's highly ordered.
We simply do not observe macroscale temporal reversals in the laboratory. If we drop a glass, it shatters. The shards do not spontaneously reassemble and leap back into our hands.
But we do observe extreme anomalies in biological thermodynamics that look exactly like that shattering glass reassembling. And this logically brings us to the biggest macroscopic mystery of all.
Which is,
how do these quantum choices scale up to drive the sheer coherence of biological evolution? Standard physics fundamentally struggles to explain the extreme morphogenesis and self-organization of living systems.
biology is complex, but it obeys physics.
A localized sack of biochemicals does not spontaneously write poetry. We are constantly fighting a localized battle against entropy. To explain this, TGD introduces the Negentropy maximization principle, or NMP, as the foundational variational principle of consciousness.
I must interject to clarify the baseline for our listeners. The standard second law of thermodynamics states that in an isolated system, entropy, or physical disorder, always increases. Order inevitably decays into thermal equilibrium.
Precisely, which is why TGD expands the paradigm through atomic physics. To understand NMP, we must understand how TGD integrates p-adic number fields. Real numbers map our physical space, distances, mass, classical measurements.
And p-adics represent cognition?
Yes. P-adic numbers represent the physical correlates of cognition and imagination. When we calculate entanglement knee-jerk entropy using p-adic norms rather than standard logarithms, the knee-jerk entropy can be inherently positive.
Which feels like a mathematical sleight of hand.
Let me offer a concrete analogy. Standard thermodynamics is like a massive library where books slowly fall off the shelves into a random, chaotic pile on the floor over time. That is physical entropy increasing.
A well-established physical reality.
The Negentropy maximization principle states that state function reductions mathematically mandate an increase in algebraic complexity measured by the effective Planck constant, HEF. It is like an invisible librarian entering the room, analyzing the intellectual content of the books, and sorting them by subject matter and cross-reference.
An invisible librarian sounds a lot like a teleological force.
For non-trivial extensions of rational numbers, evolution is not a random Darwinian accident. It is mathematically driven by an unavoidable increase in this universal intelligence quotient. Biological evolution is the universe mandating an increase in conscious cognitive information.
That's a compelling argument. But have you considered the extensive, physically grounded work on non-equilibrium thermodynamics? Jeremy England's rigorous mathematical models demonstrate exactly how the second law naturally drives self-organization in open systems, completely independent of cognitive number fields.
Open systems, yes, but
We do not exist in an isolated system. The Earth is bathed in a continuous external energy source, low-entropy solar radiation. When a localized system is exposed to this energy, matter spontaneously rearranges itself to dissipate that energy more efficiently.
dissipation isn't cognition, though.
You observe the emergence of complex biological structures, like a leaf optimizing photosynthesis, and it is completely deterministic. It is simply matter finding the most efficient path to dissipate heat. We do not need p-adic number fields, we do not need infinite hierarchies of Planck constants, and we certainly do not need a universal teleology dictating an increase in intelligence.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because England's view fundamentally conflates thermodynamic entropy with genuine cognitive information. I do not dispute dissipative adaptation as a mechanism for heat transfer, but thermodynamics entirely fails to quantify meaning, cognition, or biological coherence.
It quantifies energy transfer, which is all that is strictly necessary.
It only measures energy states. The standard model gives us physical entropy, but it has no mathematical parameter for conscious information. NMP is absolutely crucial here. By measuring cognitive entanglement negentropy using p-adic norms, TGD provides a strictly quantifiable mathematical distinction between living, negentropic matter and inanimate, entropic matter.
A distinction based on unobservable p-adic norms.
This is an ontological distinction that physicalism wholly lacks.
In a strictly materialist universe, a human being and a carbonaceous meteorite are fundamentally just interacting collections of quarks and electrons obeying the exact same statistical mechanics. You can measure the heat dissipation of both.
Yes, because they are both made of matter.
But TGD provides the actual mathematical architecture for why the human is conscious, capable of forming mathematical models, and capable of directed intentional action.
But we must meticulously evaluate the immense empirical cost of that mathematical architecture. You successfully distinguish the human from the meteorite, yes, but you do so by assigning the human an unobservable dark matter magnetic body.
It is a predicted theoretical construct.
You assert this magnetic body operates with an infinite hierarchy of Planck constants, is governed by p-adic number fields representing cognition, and exerts teleological control over ordinary biomatter via backwards-in-time causation and dark Josephson radiation. Occam's razor cannot simply be discarded when the math becomes difficult.
Sometimes reality is complex.
Materialism lacks a complete, satisfying explanation for the subjective feeling of consciousness. I will readily admit that. The hard problem of consciousness remains a profound epistemological gap in our current science, but materialism retains a rigorous empirical restraint that allows us to test, verify, and predict.
We can test TGD as well.
We can isolate a protein folding sequence. We can manipulate biochemistry and predict the exact physiological outcome. We simply cannot falsify a p-adic negentropy gradient operating within the geometric parameters of an 8-dimensional embedding space.
Falsifiability is vital, and Pickinen's paper explicitly addresses testable predictions, specifically regarding the universal cyclotron energy spectrum of dark ions in the Bio-photon energy range. There are measurable effects of HF scaling on the macroscopic coherence of living tissue.
Measurable in theory, perhaps.
But more importantly, to restrict physics solely to what can currently be measured by our inherently limited macroscopic instruments is to trap ourselves in an epistemological dead end. If the framework of the universe fundamentally relies on the integration of the observer, our instruments must evolve to measure the correlates of cognition, not just the physical remnants of classical particles.
It is not a dead end. It is the fundamental boundary of the scientific method itself. When a theory requires modifying the nature of time, rewriting the definition of probability, and expanding the foundational structure of spacetime into abstract mathematical realms just to explain an anomaly in a neuroscience experiment,
it explains far more than that.
We are arguably no longer practicing physics. We are constructing a highly sophisticated, mathematically beautiful theology.
Let us move to synthesize our positions. To summarize my stance, traditional materialism hits an insurmountable epistemological wall regarding consciousness, free will, and the quantum measurement problem.
It maps the mechanics brilliantly, though.
It maps the mechanics brilliantly, yes, but it leaves us with an impoverished ontology where subjective experience is an illusion and the conscious observer is mathematically exiled from the universe they are observing. TGD through zero-energy ontology, the FF hierarchies, and the Negentropy maximization principle provides a mathematically rigorous, unified paradigm.
A deeply speculative one.
In this framework, consciousness is not a biological accident or a localized emergent property generated by brain heat. It is the fundamental fabric of quantum reality, existing precisely as this sequence of quantum transitions between deterministic time evolutions.
And to summarize my stance, while standard physics undeniably has profound open questions, particularly at the quantum biological interface, its ultimate strength lies in its empirical restraint.
Even if it can't explain consciousness,
TGD risks prioritizing mathematical elegance and philosophical satisfaction over empirical verifiability. By introducing p-adic adels to quantify cognition, dark matter magnetic bodies to orchestrate biology, and macroscopic backward time signals to rescue free will, it maps an exquisitely complex, beautiful mathematical universe.
because the universe is beautifully complex.
But in doing so, it steps away from the firm ground of testable physical mechanics and squarely into the speculative realm of metaphysics. It attempts to solve the hard problem of consciousness by making the universe infinitely harder to empirically verify.
Yet we can certainly agree that the phenomenological realities of quantum biology
continue to expose profound gaps in our current scientific frameworks. The precise mechanics of how molecules find each other in a crowded, thermal cellular environment.
The reality of macroscopic quantum coherence in avian navigation and photosynthesis.
Exactly. And the precise timing of conscious intent. All of this demands much deeper answers than classical thermodynamics currently provides.
Absolutely. The tension between the strictly minimal ontology of standard materialism and expansive mathematically driven paradigms like topological geometrata dynamics remains a vital intellectual frontier.
It truly is.
It is a debate that tests the limits of how we define physics itself, demanding our highest level of academic scrutiny, and it will certainly be the foundation for many rigorous symposiums to come.
We will leave it to the listener to weigh the ontological arguments presented today. But the next time you reflect upon that meticulously engineered, deterministic clockwork universe, consider carefully whether you are merely a predetermined gear caught helplessly within the mechanism, or the profound quantum leap that brings the entire design into conscious existence.